right, everybody, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for coming out to join us today. My name is Megan Adams. I'm the outreach coordinator here at NC, and this is Sarah Brown, our stewardship program manager, who's gonna be presenting this workshop for you all today. For anyone who doesn't know, NC or the Nooksack Salmon Enhancement Association, we believe that salmon are an essential part of the environment, cultures, and economy here in the Pacific Northwest. We engage our community to recover wild salmon for future generations through education, restoration, and stewardship programs, which some of the stewardship programs you'll hear about in the workshop today. Again, thank you all so much for coming out to our campus. We're really glad to have you out. And before we begin, we'd like to give a land acknowledgement. So if you could please join me in that. NC recognizes the Coast Salish peoples, including but not limited to the Lummi Nation, Nooksack Indian Tribe, and Semiahmoo First Nation as the original inhabitants and stewards of the mountains, wetlands, and waterways we now call Whatcom County. These communities have been connected to and cared for the Salish Sea Basin since time immemorial through our present day and into the future time immeasurable. We acknowledge that colonization is the reason we live on this unceded land and led to the depletion of native salmon populations and their habitat, which is why NC exists as an organization today. Through ongoing struggles caused by colonization, including the taking and destruction of land, resources, and culture, the Coast Salish tribes have fought for the rights of their people and the land they are closely related to. They continue to be leaders in stewardship and restoration through traditional ecological knowledge, land management, restoration science, and as co-managers of our fisheries. And this acknowledgement is not an action, but a call to action to work towards larger truth-telling, reconciliation, and restoration between our communities and shared lands. So again, thank you all for joining us today. I really hope that everyone here learned something new about salmon and how about we can all connect with them right here in our local watersheds. So again, thank you for joining us in person and online. For everyone here in person, bathrooms are straight back there. Feel free to get up and move about during the workshop, grab coffee, grab tea, grab whatever you want to make yourselves at home. And as we go through the workshop today, feel free to ask questions. We may need to shorten some responses that Sarah gives to make sure we have enough time for the full presentation. But we will be available until 1:30 after the workshop if anyone wants to stick around and has more that they want to talk about or more questions that you want to ask. And for those of you online, I will be monitoring the chat, so feel free to type your questions and comments in there. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Megan. I'll start a little bit with who I am. So my name is Sarah Brown. I'm a stewardship program manager, as Megan mentioned. I started working at NC as an AmeriCorps member in 2018, running our coordinating our stewardship programs on the ground, so hosting our volunteer events and our salmon sighting events. I came back as a full-time staff member in my current role in 2020 and have been managing those exact programs since. My time at NC has been filled with absorbing as much information as I can about salmon from a lot of different sources, which is why I'm really excited to host this topic today. It's one of our most frequent questions is, where can I see salmon and how are the fish doing? And it's one of those things that I have sort of collected resources on for a long time, and I'm excited to share with you how I know what I know and how I try to answer those questions as best as I can. We will get started. So the agenda today is, I don't want to dive right into those resources because there are some basics about salmon that you need to know to help guide how you look at the data I give you. So we're going to look at what you need to know about salmon, what you need to know about salmon management. I'm going to show you the online resources that I regularly use. I'm also going to show you the resources that NC has developed. And at the very end, share how to get involved if you want to do more with our organization. Okay, so first thing you need to know, what are salmon? These are the 5 Pacific salmon species. Some of the resources I'm going to show you will also include information about the 2 salmonids that aren't listed here, which are cutthroat trout, and steelhead. Those are also salmon fish and can be included in some of the data. We primarily focus on these 5 species because they are regularly anadromous. That means they migrate from freshwater to saltwater, and I'll get into that a little bit. But these are the 5 species that I'll be focusing the conversation today about. There's a fun trick to remember all 5 species. I'll talk about that at the very end in case we have time. I just have a lot to talk about, so that'll be a fun tidbit if I breeze through everything else. The second thing to know is the salmon life cycle. Salmon start as eggs. They are incubated as eggs, usually about 2 months or so. Once they hatch, they turn into alevin. As they continue to grow, they turn into fry. They start developing the ability to breathe saltwater. All of the life stages before that were happening in freshwater. And then they spend their adult life in the ocean before they come back to spawn as spawning adults. And that's usually where we see the bright color changes. And related to their life cycle is their habitat. So this is what drives where you might see salmon. So they spend their early stages of life as eggs in streams, in freshwater systems. So that could be streams, rivers, depends on the fish where exactly they're going to be. Once they hit that middle stage of life, they'll hit the estuary. That's where fresh and saltwater mix before they spend their adult life in the ocean. And then the very end of their life is when they come back to spawn. And that spawning period of their life is usually where they're the easiest to see because they're coming back. They're the biggest they'll ever be. And they're the brightest colored that they'll ever be too. And then salmon timing is the last thing to know about salmon. Depending on the species, salmon return to spawn at different times of the year. So usually these dates are what we see in Whatcom County. And they're I want you to imagine these boxes as having invisible fringe on either side because they're also wild animals and they're heavily impacted by a lot of factors. And this is just the spawning season. So this is just when they're actively spawning. A lot of these fish will also migrate at different times too. So the one example I'll give is Chinook. They're not going to spawn until August through October, but especially spring Chinook are going to return to freshwater systems as early as May, which is often when the first salmon ceremonies are happening with our local tribes. So we have salmon in the rivers and streams throughout the summer, but they might not be actively spawning until later. Okay, that's what you need to know about salmon. That's a really brief umbrella overview of salmon ecology that helps sort of inform the other resources that I'm going to show. What you need to know about salmon management is there are a lot of entities involved. I've brought up a website that I like to share with people as not this one, hold on. I forgot to reset. I like to share people the State of Salmon website as a really high-level overview of salmon in Washington. This page in particular is the Partners in Recovery section, where you can read more about these different entities and what they do. But stateofsalmon.wa.gov, which you can't see because of my share screen notification.
You can move that.
I can move the black box. Oh, thank you. Oh, lovely.
And I'll share any links that Sarah uses today. I'll send out in a thank you email after this, so you all will know what those are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, almost everything I've shown you is available either on our website or, like Megan said, in the link. So stateofsalmon.wa.gov up here is a great resource to get a high level sort of state overview of salmon. Back to the presentation. I like to bring up who's involved in salmon recovery because often NSEA is a really easy, tangible source for people. But we're also really low on that sort of hierarchy of management, and actually not really involved in management at all. So we have federal government, tribes, state agencies, salmon recovery regions. That's what the map here is showing. So we are in this massive Puget Sound region, which is going to become important in a little bit. So the Puget Sound region is anything from where we are at the very north end down through Tacoma and up on the west side of the sound. Our salmon recovery lead entity is the Puget Sound Partnership. If you've ever heard of the Puget Sound Partnership, they also have a lot of resources about the sort of vitality of the watershed into Puget Sound. And it is another great resource. I don't think I have it linked in here, but we'll include it in the email because that's another good website if you really want to dive into the different components related to salmon and related to Puget Sound watershed health. And then it goes all the way down to local governments. So that's salmon management. Who's involved in salmon monitoring is often the tribes, the state, so the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I will try to remember to say acronyms fully throughout this, but I might accidentally say WDFW, which is Department of Fish and Wildlife. If I ever say anything that you don't remember what it means, please feel free to ask. And local governments. And then fishing regulations is managed by the local tribes in the state, and that happens annually. And I have a resource that I'll show you with that as well. This graph is what I like to show people because this is our area. So this is basically Whatcom County. The Water Resource Inventory Area, or RIA 1, is primarily Whatcom County. There is a watershed management board, which manages the large-scale projects and salmon recovery plans and watershed management plans for our region. And I bring this to these kinds of conversations because I like to show people that this salmon work group here, we usually have 1 or 2 staff participate in this, but otherwise we're not involved in the overall management of. We are usually participating to help share what we're doing and be informed by priorities that these sort of leadership roles have. So I like to preface what I'm going to talk about here with that information because NC's role is as a nonprofit. We're as a sort of grassroots local community connection to salmon. So Megan mentioned our mission, and that mission is usually fulfilled through freshwater habitat restoration with landowners and local education and stewardship, like what we're doing today, like our volunteer work parties that I'll share about a little bit at the end. So on to the online resources. We get these questions a lot. How are the fish doing? And where can I see salmon? I like including these questions because we have a lot of interns that help support our programs. And so I help train them on being able to answer these questions. And a few summers ago, I mentioned to interns, I said, one of the first questions you're going to get is how are the fish doing? And I'm trying to teach them about like how you can go about answering that question, especially if you're not super familiar or you haven't memorized the specific answers that you want to provide. And then immediately that day, we went out into the county to do some site visits and help them get more familiar. And someone saw my shirt and said, "Oh, the fish people, how are the fish doing?" Immediately, with all the interns standing around. It was a really like beautiful full circle moment where I was like, see, people want to know how the fish are doing. I mean, the whole reason NC's organization, the whole reason we exist as an organization is because salmon need help. And that's why a lot of entities focus on improving salmon across our region. And I could spend an entire hour talking about why salmon need help, but that's not what we're doing today. So I'll leave it at that. And I'll focus on how I answer the question, how are the fish doing? So for Department of Fish and Wildlife, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, I Google salmon forecast. They usually come out around March, sometimes April, which, there we go. And then let's see if I can see my mouse up here. If you Google salmon forecasts, you're gonna find this website. North of Falcon is the process that the state uses to determine the salmon fishing regulations. So all entities that manage fishing north of Falcon, which is an area lower in Oregon, come together annually and determine the fishing regulations based on a lot of science I don't understand. They then come out with these statewide forecasts and have a number of links that you can look at and dive deeper into if you'd like. But I focus on usually what's at the top is the forecast for each salmon species. And I have it in my PowerPoint so that I don't have to navigate those as and I'm going to pause real quick. If any of our kiddos today want to play some games, we have some fun activities in our forest. Awesome. Okay. So this is really tiny. Again, these links will be available so that you could go dive into these numbers a little later. But this is what pulls up when you click on the chum, pink, and sockeye forecast. One thing I forgot to mention is Whatcom County is unique in being home to all 5 species of Pacific salmon. So we do have sockeye salmon in the Nooksack River. We have a really small riverine population. And I mentioned that because you're not going to see sockeye forecast listed here. It isn't often the forecasts, the model runs are focused on what's called evolutionarily significant units. So they're populations of salmon that are vital in supporting salmon recovery. The Nooksack River sockeye population is a small sort of outlier population of sockeye, especially compared to what's near us in Washington, which is Baker River down in Skagit area, and Lake Washington, obviously in Seattle. So that's just a little side caveat. I use these for our chum and our pink. So chum every fall return, and usually on the forecast you see the Nooksack River listed as an individual, and then pink every 2 years. So only in odd years will you get a pink forecast. You can usually compare these to the 2024 data for chum, 2023 data for pink, and you can see just the fluctuations year to year. The one nuance to this is that salmon population return can really vary year to year. Just because a chum return is really high one year doesn't mean, or is a lot higher one year than the next, doesn't necessarily mean that they're recovering. And the same for the opposite. If our chum forecast was really low this year compared to last year, it's probably a natural fluctuation. Salmon are kind of like, I like to describe them as weather. Weather varies year to year, right? Climate, you have to zoom really far out to see the overall trends. Salmon's kind of the same. They often return in these average age groups. So chum return usually average 4 years old or so. Pink are always 2 years old. And you see these sort of boom years and then these like sort of dips just because they've naturally created these waves of variability. A good example up in Canada, if you ever want to visit, every 4 years they host the Sockeye Festival near Kamloops. And they do it every 4 years because every 4th year they get a massive return of sockeye because of that natural variation. And I think it's coming up in 2026. I believe we went in 2022. So it's coming up soon. For our pink population, the shift in a higher forecast is really great. This forecast from 2023 is right after the 2021 flood that impacted Whatcom County really significantly. If I had pulled up the 2021 forecast for pink, the number would be 250,000. Pink are actually our most abundant species in Whatcom and in Washington, period. So 2 years ago, their forecast was about 1/10 of their typical population, but now we see it even higher, which I just said, don't use year-to-year data as a trend indicator, but I like to see that because we experience a really significant impact on our pink populations. And so a higher number with those is going to be really good. And pink are expecting a boom year this year. We have about 7 million forecasted to return to the Puget Sound area, with about 1 million coming back to Skagit. That is a huge, if you like fishing, especially pink fishing in Skagit is always really popular. So the numbers for Coho are very similar. Coho, they actually give the totals for 2024, 2025. So it helps you look at the difference. Again, for the Nooksack River, which I highlighted here, this year is lower. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing poorly. It might be a natural fluctuation in the population. And then same for Chinook. So I've highlighted the North Fork here and the South Fork. Chinook is really interesting because the forecast is always split into North Fork and South Fork because they're actually two genetically distinct populations. So North Fork Chinook have very specific genetics compared to South Fork Chinook, even though they're the same species. So if we lose one population, we're losing an entire genetic pool of salmon. So they are managed and monitored separately. And both are seeing an increase this year, which is great. The Chinook recovery goal, Chinook is our most prized species for culture, economy, environment, etc. It's our biggest salmon. It's called the king for a reason. And it's usually the one that management entities are most focused on recovering because they are listed on the Endangered Species Act as threatened in Puget Sound. The recovery goal for South Fork Chinook, for example, is 9,900 natural origin returners. This year we're looking at 113. No, that's the difference. Sorry. This year we're looking at just under 400 returning. So we have a long way to go before we hit that recovery goal. Okay, so that's how I answer how the fish doing. Those forecasts help me direct people towards resources that show, at least at a high level, what our regional scientists are expecting to return. Again, lots of factors impact what those returns will actually look like. And that's just because salmon are a wild species and have a really complicated life cycle. The second sort of tied question that I most often get is, where can I see salmon? You hear about salmon a lot. Salmon are an icon of this area, but if you don't know when and where to go, you can easily miss them for a long time. And that's where I'm going to start with our online resources. So for historical data, I use the statewide Washington Integrated Fish Distribution Database, which is a really long name that is basically a map that all of those management and monitoring entities have put their data in. So I actually have it pulled up here so that I can show you what it looks like when you are looking at it. Let me get my mouse because that's going to be easier for this one. When you are looking at it, up here, here. Okay. So this is for all of Washington. If I zoom out, it kind of breaks because it's too much data. But if I scrolled all the way down here, all of these creeks are going to populate. Anything highlighted means that it has salmon data associated with it. It also includes cutthroat and steelhead, which is why you often see these lakes, for example, highlighted, because we do have residential cutthroat and steelhead, which means that they don't migrate. So they just stay. But when I'm looking at this website, so I often get questions of, I live by a stream, do salmon return to that? I don't know. So I usually pull up this database. I filter data based on species. And here's where you can indicate exactly what. So maybe I'll pull up pink odd year, and it'll only highlight pink streams for me. So pink are primarily a river run species. So they use the Nooksack River, which is what this is here, and some of its major tributaries like Fish Trap, Bertrand, and then the Three Forks. So the Nooksack River has interesting sort of geology, because we have three forks that feed the main stem. The North Fork up here is fed by Mount Shuckson. The middle fork is fed by Mount Baker. So these are the two mountains not seen on the map here. And then the South Fork is fed by groundwater and snowmelt from the Twin Sisters, which means that these three forks, especially when I was talking about Chinook having two genetically distinct populations, there are usually their recovery plans are different because the forks are so distinctly different in just natural geology. So the North Fork and the Middle Fork are glacially fed. They have a sort of slower response time to a lot of what we're seeing in terms of climate change. We know our glaciers are shrinking, but they have a little bit of this buffer because they are glacially fed. So in a really hot summer, they're still getting glacial melt coming in and feeding the streams so that they stay cold and higher. The South Fork doesn't get that convenience. It relies heavily on snowpack, which melts really quickly if we have a heat wave. And then it's spring fed. So that water is naturally warmer because it's coming out of the ground. And not from frozen ice. And the South Fork is heavily impacted by agriculture. The South Fork Valley is a rich space for agriculture and food production, and which means that unfortunately a lot of the riverside forest were removed to help facilitate high-level agriculture production. And you don't see that in the North and Middle Forks because they are heavily forested, and the North Fork especially resides mostly in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. So I like to pull this up just to help bring a little bit more of that context to the different salmon populations and where they go and where we might see fewer numbers, especially in the South Fork because of the habitat concerns. Anyway, so this is pink. If I wanted to look at coho, coho is our most widely distributed salmon, so not much of the map changes when I pull up coho streams. Coho love shallow, tiny creeks. So they come through the main river system, but they'll also disperse into these really tiny unnamed tributaries. When you're looking at Swifty, which is what I call it for short, any of these streams you're interested in. So for example, let me pull up Padden Creek here. That's a nearby stream that lots of people are interested in because it's really accessible and easy to see. I can click on Padden Creek and it'll tell me what salmon are, let me pull it up in a different way. There we go. It'll tell me what salmon have been observed here. So winter steelhead, it's gradient accessible. This basically means steelhead can access Padden Creek. But if I look at coho, this is coho, they've been documented in Padden Creek. Same for chum, they've been documented. And then I think the other one is cutthroat. They've also been documented. So this is where the limitations of this map come in. The actual data that populates these creeks and these data points isn't, it's either not publicly accessible or I haven't found it. And so we're looking at a snapshot, which can be really hard because I don't know when these chum were seen, right? And I have another good example that I'll pull to in a little bit, but that's one of the caveats of using a map like this is I can see what data has been documented in our area, but I can't necessarily verify that data at all. And I can't time it. I can't date it to something recent. And we know salmon are heavily impacted by climate change. So there's been lots of things happening, especially in recent years. We have warmer summers, we have lower creek flows, and we can kind of naturally see salmon timing changing too. And so the data showing that chum are in Padding Creek might be really old, back when they were doing better, or it might be really recent. So that's the caveat to that, is I can kind of see historically what's the chance that salmon have used these streams. One other resource that I like to use specifically for Bellingham streams is the City of Bellingham website. They have some resources about what they've observed in Bellingham streams specifically. So they have I just Google City of Bellingham fish studies. This page pops up and they talk about a lot of different things. They link to NSEA, which is really nice of them. The City of Bellingham also does spawner surveys. So they have some of their spawner survey data that you can look at to see what they've seen. They do smolt traps to see what fish are leaving Bellingham streams. They also look at forage fish. Forage fish are often fish in the estuary system. They help feed salmon when they're out in the ocean. Those are really high indicators of another high impact component of salmon life cycle. They do juvenile studies, but then at the very bottom, this fish use table is what I like to look at, because it shows the major Bellingham streams. So we have Padding Creek here. It shows the tributaries. So like Connolly Creek is a tributary of Padding Creek. A tributary is just a smaller stream that flows into a bigger one. And then it also shows different sections of Padding Creek. And what I like about this is up here at the top, it shows you the different salmon species. And then these numbers indicate whether or not they were documented in different studies. And those studies are linked here at the bottom. And one thing that this document does is help show a little bit of that sort of nuance. So fish use rating is they basically said, yes, studies have seen coho in Bear Creek, for example, but it's a low chance to actually see them in Bear Creek. One good example is Whatcom Creek, Lower Whatcom Creek, which is near Maritime Heritage Park, if you're familiar with the area. Regularly, consistently, can you go basically anytime between late September and November to early December and see fish. It has the highest chance of actually seeing salmon in Lower Whatcom Creek. It is a heavily used creek. So you can see that in all of these creeks. And I like to bring up this as an example when I'm talking about that data and how those maps can be informed by data that can mislead us, because this example right here is about bull trout in Squalicum Creek. And I use this example as an anecdotal story, but one of the employees at the Department of Natural Resources at the City of Bellingham was showing me this resource that's available online. And she said, we include notes there because there is one instance in 1970 that one person said they saw a bull trout in Squalicum Creek. And you can't necessarily delete data because that's not high integrity. So they can make a note that says, yes, these documents show that there's bull trout in Squalicum Creek, but note that that's probably wrong because that's the only time that someone has indicated that bull trout is in Squalicum Creek. I use this example to help return to the caveats that I've used for the Swifty map. Is you can't check that kind of data. So not saying that none of it can be trusted. I'm just saying that you have to kind of go in with a grain of salt and what can be seen as 100% accurate. Now that I've filled you with lots of doubt, I'm going to move on to what NC, oh, I had it up here. I'm going to move on to what NC has done to help provide resources that people can better digest and use confidently. So our salmon discovery program has two main components. Our salmon sighting events, which we've been running for about 10 years now, where we basically post up by a salmon bearing stream and say, come see salmon with us, fingers crossed, and we'll answer any questions you have about them. And then our Salmon Spotters project is a new project. It was started in 2023, where volunteers have helped monitor creeks, just making observational data collection. And you basically adopt a site, you visit that site regularly, and you tell us what you see. And so I have our website pulled up because there are a couple of things on our website that I want to show you related to those programs. So our salmon discovery, nope, that's the fish table. Our salmon discovery project, nope, salmon discovery program. First, I'll do a call out to our salmon sightings. It's pink here. Pink are my favorite salmon. They only come every 2 years and they are really fun to see. So we do salmon sighting events up in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest every other year, and hope to see them. So throw this out there as an opportunity for you to see pink salmon. And then every fall, we also host salmon sighting events, usually focused on coho and chum. Coho and chum and pink and odd years are our highest populations. So they're the easiest to see because they come back in bigger numbers. When I was showing you those forecasts for Chinook, the Chinook forecast for the Nooksack River was roughly, oh no, I don't remember. It was in the few thousands, and you're talking about a few thousand fish over the entire Nooksack watershed. So seeing them is a lot harder. And it's a lot more luck-based. So we focus our public salmon sighting events on coho and chum just because they're a little bit more consistent. So this is where you can see information about any events that we're hosting for salmon sightings. And then our Salmon Spotters project page is where you can see the data that our volunteers have collected over the last few years. So 2024, 2025 was our last year, and we had Salmon Spotters visit a number of different streams. I think 19 total streams in Whatcom County, a lot of them being in Bellingham and then a few out in the outer county. And I'm not going to scroll through all of this. I just wanted to highlight that this is a space where if you're curious about a creek, there might be some recent data about what volunteers have seen in that creek. And then I think we have, this shows the different data points here, but the one resource that I'm most excited about and going to spend the most time on is our, oh, let me get to that via our website so you know what it looks like. So if I go to our salmon sighting page and I go down here, we have salmon in their habitat. So you can see and learn more about the different species of salmon. You can watch a video of the salmon life cycle, and you can learn a little bit more about the trees that help salmon. But if I go back, If I click salmon sighting in Whatcom County, that's where you get your quick reference diagram of when salmon are spawning. And that's where we have this map, which keeps defaulting to that view, and I don't like it. Trying to fix it, but this is our public salmon creek spots map. So this is where we've highlighted areas that we know you can go access because they're open to the public and you can potentially see salmon. So I'm really excited about this resource. It is brand new. I put it on the website 2 weeks ago, and I'm using this opportunity to introduce it to the public because you can not only see the different spots in Whatcom County where you can see salmon, but you can click on the data here. Actually, let me pull this out to a bigger map. I know it's exclusive. I don't know why it keeps going to that view. I have to play around with it and see. But you can click on any of these dots and nope, that's worse. It provides a little bit more background. So this spot is Oyster Creek. It gives you directions of how to get there. It gives you a link to the Google Maps. And then it tells you the salmon potential. So this is directly from that Swifty map. So I basically looked at each creek and I said, what does Swifty say you can see? And then I tell you what salmon have been seen by NC volunteers. Oyster Creek is one of those ones we go to every year because it's a consistent good chance to see salmon. And then we include some photos so that you're not going in blind and you have an idea of what you're going to see. And then if we have them, we'll show you the pictures of the salmon that we're seeing. So that's one example. Padding Creek, I used as an example earlier. It has the interurban trail running through it. It's got a couple of different parks that Padding Creek runs through. It's a great spot to sort of commune with nature. And let's see, where's Fairhaven Park? Fairhaven Park, salmon potential is chum, coho, steelhead. And last year we had volunteers see chum. And that's it right here. Kind of hard to see, but. And then some of them include a little bit extra map of like where you can park to access the trail, etc. So this map is, I think, a really important piece of answering that question, where can I see salmon? Because this is what I want people to use if they're interested in seeing salmon. The one thing I already want to change about this map is to add the timing in there. Because, for example, if we look at the Welcome Bridge, which is right off of Mount Baker Highway here on Mosquito Lake Road, it's on I think this is technically the North Fork Nooksack. Because it is directly over the Nooksack River, the potential to see salmon is all of them, because the Nooksack River is home to all 5 species of Pacific salmon and that 6 species of steelhead. So the one thing I want to add is not only the potential, but like the actual timing, because now you need to cross-reference that other thing I showed you that shows when each species comes in. But showed you a picture of the bridge. There's a little park run by Whatcom County underneath. And hard to get photos from the river of fish, but you can see them there. And then the one other example I wanted to show is Shell Creek. That's not Shell Creek. This is Shell Creek. Shell Creek is this tiny little property owned by the city of Ferndale. It's one of NC's first big restoration projects that happened in the late 1990s or so. And that project was to take this ditch, which had been straightened for agriculture, and return it back to the historical creek meandering that it did. And according to Swifty, we have chum, coho, and steelhead potential. And we had a salmon spotter help monitor this area because they live nearby. And in 2023, they never saw fish. And I told them, keep going. Maybe you'll see them. And then in 2024, they saw a coho because they kept going. I use Shell Creek as an example of like, we know salmon come back, but depending on a lot of things, you might not see them 1 year to the next, or you might see them 1 year. And I think they went a few different times and they saw this fish one day and then it swam off to somewhere else, right? So there's an art to seeing salmon in Whatcom County. A lot of it is getting the best knowledge you can. What? Well, yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes, a lot of it is patience. A lot of it is getting as much knowledge as you can about the salmon ecology and timing, and then a lot of luck and a lot of just sort of relying on the environment to just be in good condition, which is unfortunate. Okay. Let's see if I have anything else. Last thing I wanted to touch on is getting involved. We have volunteer work parties weekly most of the year to help steward salmon habitat. We have some this summer that focuses on mostly litter pickup, some invasive removal because it's hot and trees don't like it being hot. But then in the fall and spring, we also plant a lot of trees and love when people help us with that. We plant anywhere from 25 to 35,000 trees a year as an organization. And then be a salmon spotter. So if you saw that map and you wanted to go explore some of those orange spots in Whatcom County and wanted to help increase the amount of information that we can put in that map, we have our salmon spotter training coming up in September, and I invite all of you to join. It's a really low effort, high impact opportunity where you just go to a public access stream. I send you a little form on your phone and you fill it in and that's it. And then you wait for the salmon to come by. So it's really exciting and helps inform.
So you can kind of choose.
Yep.
What works for you.
Yep.
And then you go weekly.
Yep. Yep. You go on your own schedule and all data is good data. I have some folks that they live on a property that has a stream coming through, and I get an observation daily, which is a lot, but it's cool to see. And then I have some folks that live by a park or they've adopted a park in the county, and then they go once a week. Sometimes they miss a few weeks, but all data is good. And that map I showed you is any of these spots, especially out in the county, if you are adventurous, would be great to have additional folks monitoring. I wish we could afford to just pay me to go sit by a stream. That would be amazing. And so that's why I'm really excited to have the volunteer support for this project. And it has been really successful. I didn't know what it was going to be like when I introduced it in 2023. We had about, I think, around 45 volunteers help support in some way, whether it was one observation or daily observations. And last year that increased to about 80, which is great. And it helped provide a lot of information for some of these areas. And there are a few that we still don't have good data on. So for example, Terrell Creek runs through Birch Bay State Park. We haven't seen any salmon. I have an old photo that our projects team saw salmon one day when they were out there. But that was a few years ago. And so we don't have any recent data of salmon that have been observed in Terrell Creek. That's one example. Haney Creek here we have lots of data of Haney Creek. Haney Creek is a great one. So these are also just good spots where you can go in and see what have people seen. And if you want a beautiful view of some coho salmon, Haney Creek's a good one. It's owned by this property is owned by the Whatcom Land Trust. So it's a really beautiful like day adventure to go explore that property. And then there's just some other spots in the county that we either have data because someone lived nearby or we don't, and it needs to be adopted. Okay, I breezed through a lot of information. We have 10 minutes left for questions. I'd love to hear them if you have them. Otherwise, I'm open to any discussions of what more you want.
This is just kind of related to what you're talking about. Do sockeye spawn in lakes?
Yeah, great.
Where does the nooksack?
Great question. Sockeye, their life cycle is they naturally use lake systems. So the closest example is down in the Skagit River. They have a huge population of sockeye that go to Baker Lake off of the Baker River. We have a very small population of what's called riverine sockeye. So they use the river as if it's a lake. Yeah. And we have some old photos of man, if I could see, I have some old photos that our summer program people have taken of sockeye up high in the North Fork, because that's where you get some really like usually clear lower waters compared to like the big main river system. The main system of the river is really hard to see salmon because it's deep and fast moving, but once you get up higher into the headwaters, you usually get these pockets of slower moving rivers and clearer water. And they have these just beautiful photos of these bright red sockeye salmon in the Nooksack River. So we have some photo evidence that yes, they are there. And then other organizations like Trout Unlimited is a local nonprofit. They have a chapter that's local. They recently did a citizen science project all about environmental DNA. And so they collected environmental DNA samples across the Nooksack River Basin and collected sockeye DNA samples too. So they're still there. They're just very, very small population and very elusive. Any questions from the online folks? Cool. Might be the clearest I've ever been. I'm getting better.
We love that way to remember.
Oh yes, we have time for that. So the way to remember all 5 species of Pacific salmon is using your hand. Oh, I should turn my camera on. How about you turn your camera on and be the example hand for me? Okay, so Megan's going to be the example hand, but if you hold your hand up, your thumb rhymes with chum salmon. Your pointer finger, there's a couple of ways, but you can use your pointer finger to point from your socks to your eyes. So that's sockeye. Your middle finger is the biggest of all your fingers, so it rules all the other ones. It's the king of all your other fingers. King is another name for Chinook. Your ring finger is where you potentially wear silver. Silver is another name for coho salmon. And then your pinky is the pink salmon. And the smallest. Pink salmon are the smallest. King salmon are the biggest. So your biggest finger is the king, your smallest finger is the pinky. I don't know who came up with that, but it has earned its weight in being useful. For everyone. Yeah. I get people that come to our events sometimes and I'm like, have you ever heard of NC? And they immediately they're like, I know my salmon, because they use their hand and they hold it up and they're like, I remember it. So yeah.
So I don't remember if you said, but I want to reiterate if you did, that if you are interested in Salmon Spotters or any other events like this one or volunteer opportunities, the best way to stay informed about those things is through Fish Bites. a lot of you probably already receive our email newsletter, but in case you don't, that's the most consistent way that you can stay informed about all of our events and opportunities that are coming up. And Sarah, did you say when Salmon Spotter trainings are
They're
coming up?
going to be roughly September and October.
Mhm.
We're hosting them later because I am not including pink as part of the program because I'm enlisting the help of our previous Salmon Spotters for pink this year before we add it on to the list.
So probably start advertising in August.
Yep.
So
Yeah, so if you're interested in that, if people online didn't hear because I was
would
muted.
there be like a
Probably in
limited
August.
amount of people? So like it might be full. Or can
It's
you guarantee? Definitely want to do it.
yeah, 100%. Definitely guaranteed that you can come. We will limit quote unquote participation just because it makes the trainings easier. But I'm also planning on hosting multiple.
When do the salmon spotters go to just one place in the assigned place?
Yeah.
Or do you actually can walk along the creek?
Well, it depends on the property. So there are a couple of spots that I've marked on the map. The Welcome Bridge is a good example. It has a little park down near it, and so some of the riverbanks are easy to see or easy to access, but the actual like viewing spot is the bridge itself because you can look straight down. So it depends on the property. And I would say it's probably for most of them, a section of stream runs through the property. So you can visit multiple sections of stream. What we encourage salmon spotters to do, at least for the observation component, is to stand in one place for about 15 minutes and just look at one place, because salmon move. And if you walk up while a salmon is swimming down, you might miss that. Or you might end up like double counting because the salmon swims back up where you are, that kind of thing. So there's most of the sites you could probably make multiple observations just by walking around and seeing different sections of the creek. But for the observations themselves, we encourage that you stay still just because it's the easiest. That patience. Salmon are also very skittish. They're fish. They've naturally developed aversion to movement and anything that might cause harm. So a lot of movement might keep them hidden for a while versus just staying still, and then all of a sudden one will swim by you.
Any other questions?
Is this helpful? This is the first time we've hosted this particular topic. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed it.
Great. That's good to hear. I figured it would be helpful because I do get these questions a lot. So that's good to hear that you enjoyed it. And like Megan mentioned, we'll share all of the links that I included so that you can access them. And obviously our website hosts some of the data that we have from our project.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. Sarah and I will be sticking around for a bit if any of you want to hang out and talk more about anything from this presentation or our other programs we have here at NC. But other than that, yeah, we'll send out links. I'll send out Sarah's contact information. Feel free to, like, if you have any more questions, you can always feel free to reach out to us.
Yes, I highly encourage emails for any of your salmon questions. I'll let you know if I can't answer them, and I usually have some resource to send you to if I don't know the answer. So email is open invitation. Yeah.
I think this is a really good pamphlet.
Yes, we have more of those. If you don't already have that pamphlet, you should definitely take one with you as a good reminder of the different salmon species. And then when you open it all the way, it's a beautiful poster of the salmon life cycle.
Yeah, I have some flyers and things up here and some pamphlets over there. So if you didn't take a look at those, I have the salmon sighting flyers and work party flyers and things like that. And yeah. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you if you joined us online, and hope you all have a great Friday.